How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the Thursday afternoon class. It's been a long week. I don't know about you, but it's been a long week for me, and I am ready for this week to be over. How's everybody doing out there in TV land, in YouTube land, I should say? Looks like we've got 8 people out there. If you're out there, type in the chat bar, send me a text. Let me know who you are. Roll call. Roll call. Araya. Andre's here, of course. Good to see you. Michaela. Good to see you as well, too. Mel G, I hope you're feeling better today. Ali, nice icon. I like that. A very dangerous motorcycle riding icon there. Fantastic. Maybe D is out there. I don't know if D Oxendine is out there. D Miller. Good to see y'all. Thanks to everybody for showing up. Oh, my goodness. We only have 4 now. 5 now. Uh-oh. Well, we'll carry on. How are y'all doing today? Fantastic. I'm doing great. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit more about physical development in infancy. We're going to talk kind of about the sensation part of infancy as well. Shashan, good to see you. She checked in on text phone. Erica Schultz checked in on text phone. Good to see you. So we're going to talk a little bit about perception, because if you remember from the video I showed you last night in webinar that I sent around, perception and motor movement kind of go together. So as we learn to move, we change the world that we can perceive. As we perceive a different world, that then affects the way we move about in the world and the kind of motor movements that we make. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to talk about sleeping, sensory functioning, and nutritional needs today. I'm sorry about that, Andre. Hopefully you're still focusing and all right. Yeah, I know we're all ready to be done with it. Let's talk a little bit about sleep in infancy. The first thing you need to know is, why do we sleep? Nobody exactly knows why we sleep, but there are general theories on why it happens. We're pretty sure it has something to do with the development of our brain and our learning and memory abilities. Now, your book talks about some of the theories that have been offered for why we sleep. If you talk to an evolutionary psychologist, they'll tell you that human beings are not properly equipped to be out at night. We don't have night vision, so it's definitely not safe for us to be out at the night. So evolutionary psychologists think that sleep developed, if you will, evolved as a protective mechanism to keep us quiet at night when we are at the highest risk. I don't know. You can never really prove an evolutionary theory. However, there are some restorative functions that have been offered for sleep. It's a restorative function. It's when your brain repairs circuits in the brain and clears out waste from the neural tissue. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the glymphatic nervous system, but it's the part of your brain that helps clean it at night while you're sleeping. So you have these ependymal cells that wrap around your arteries in your brain, and they wrap around really, really tight. But at night, what happens is these cells kind of get a little bigger, and they create, in a sense, spaces around your arteries. And at night, while you sleep, cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the middle of your brain and cleans out proteins and other waste material in your brain that aren't very useful. So biological research would definitely suggest that cleaning of the brain occurs at night. Okay. Now, we also know that synaptic connections growth is faster at night when we sleep than during the day. And lots of research has shown that lack of sleep will impair your memory. So we think that sleeping is important for the development of memories that we've learned during the day. So if you learn a list, or if you study for this class, for this exam, and then go to sleep, during REM sleep, your brain will consolidate or make those memories permanent so that you'll do better on the test the next day. Research has actually shown that as kids go through important developmental periods in their life, they're actually going to experience spikes in their REM sleep. So when your child is just learning to walk, they're going to have a spike in their REM sleep during the initial phases of learning to walk. When your child learns to talk, you're going to see that there's a little spike in REM sleep when your child begins to learn to talk. So as children engage in these important developmental epochs, we actually see spikes in REM sleep during the night. So we are pretty sure that sleep and REM sleep specifically have developmental functions. Not only does it clean the brain, but it helps us grow our synaptic connections and master the abilities that are important in our developmental process. Okay, now any of you have had a child know that children at first are no fun to hang out with because they don't know how to sleep, when to sleep, where to sleep. This right here is a sleep schedule that shows you when children are awake and asleep, and it goes from day. You'll see it goes from 3 months old all the way to 17 months old. And what you're going to see here, each day is represented, sleep is represented in blue, and awake is represented as white. So what you're going to notice is about 3 months old, the baby is starting to sleep through the night, because you'll notice from 0 to about 9 p.m., the top part of the screen you're going to see is mostly blue, but there is some white in it. Those of you who have young babies know that they wake up in the middle of the night. You'll see those little spots of white. And that you'll see that the child during the beginning part of the day, in the middle part of the day, is mostly awake, but they have lots of teeny tiny little naps. Okay, now this is 3 months old. The first 3 months are even more chaotic. But if you look at the sleeping and waking patterns of an infant, you'll notice that they don't have a really strong sleeping and waking pattern early in their life. They intersperse sleep and waking equally during the day and the night. So what you're going to see is that although a child sleeps 18 hours a day during early infancy, they're not sleeping at the right times, and that's why parents have such a difficult time the first 2 months of their baby's life. I don't know if any of you out there in YouTube land can speak to this, but if you have a comment you'd like to add to the class chat about your kids' sleeping habits, I'd be interested in hearing that. Now you'll notice about the age of 12 months, your child's going to begin to develop a more consistent sleeping pattern. And what you notice here is that there are 2 daily naps that appear to be present at kids around 12. And you'll notice that when they sleep at night, they very rarely wake up. When they're up in the morning, they stay awake until nap time. And then your kids are going to have a morning nap, and then they're going to have an afternoon nap. But notice that the blue and white are now separated out, whereas earlier in their life, the kids sleeping and waking sort of happen interchangeably. So hopefully you see that we've got these 2 naps here. And then about a year and a half or so, your kid's actually going to go down to 1 nap during the day. And then if you look at most adult sleep cycles, you would see that we'd have 2 blue bars, one at the top and one at the bottom, representing our sleeping. And then you'd see that most adults do not sleep at all during the day. So sleep is sort of a habitual behavior that develops over the first couple years of the life. REM sleep, if you look at the chart that's right underneath me, it kind of shows you not only how much infants sleep, but it also shows you an interesting insight into how they sleep. Now we think that REM sleep is important for cleaning the brain as it's helping it grow and helping it develop our abilities. Well, you know what? Who's learning the most? Infants are learning the most. They got to learn how to walk, how to talk, how to hold their hands, how to grab things, how to see things, how to look at things. And so infant children, not only do they spend 16 to 18 hours a day sleeping, but they spend half of their time in a specific kind of sleep, which is called REM sleep. Now, by the time you get to 3, 4, and 5, the children's sleep pattern is going to get a little more normal in that their REM sleep's only going to account for 25% of their sleep time. So all of us who are adults, we spend about 25% of our sleep in REM sleep when our brain is being repaired and when our synaptic connections are being strengthened. But little children, they're learning a ton more, so they're spending a lot more time in REM sleep. Hi, Ninja. Good to see you. Glad you could make it today. We're just talking a little bit about sleep here. And I was telling the class that the first 2 months of your life after having a child will be miserable as your child's suprachiasmatic nucleus matures and myelinates. You will develop a periodic sleeping pattern. But infants, they sleep all hours of the day and night with no preference for either day or night. So it can be tough as a new mom or dad. Now, your book talks a little bit about sudden infant death syndrome, which is, remember we talked about developmental psychology as being interested in improving the quality and length of our life. One of the ways in which we can do that is by preventing sudden infant death syndrome. And so this is when children inexplicably stop breathing at night while they're asleep and die. And this happens more often in younger infants, the first 6 months of the life. But I think it can. In fact, I had a friend whose baby died at 9 months of age of SIDS, and they just go to sleep one night and they stop breathing. Now, nobody knows exactly what causes SIDS. We think it might have something to do with abnormal brainstem functioning involving serotonin. Your brainstem is responsible your medulla is responsible for your breathing and heart rate. It's a subcortical brain structure that keeps you breathing even while you're asleep at night, so it might be something to do with that. It might be related to heart arrhythmia, again, another function controlled by the medulla in the brain stem. We know it can be associated with low birth weight or children. Now, then there are environmental factors as well. Children who do not have a pacifier when they go to sleep at night. So not using a pacifier is associated with a higher incidence of SIDS. If one child dies of SIDS, further children do run the risk of dying from SIDS. So we think it might be genetic, right? Another environmental cause is lower socioeconomic groups, kids who are exposed to cigarette smoking by their mom, or co-sleeping with your child. You can smother them. So SIDS is less common in moms who breastfeed or if they sleep in a bedroom with a fan, or if they sleep on their backs. That's the big thing. Back to sleep is the big campaign now because it greatly decreases the likelihood of a child dying from SIDS. When I was a young kid, my mom told me that back in the 60s and 50s, the doctor's advice was to put your kid to sleep on their stomach. And it was thought that this caused the kids to lift their head and build up muscle and spine control. So back in my day, you actually put your kid to sleep on their tummy. Now, doctors tell you to do the exact opposite. I think I mentioned on Tuesday that this sort of cultural change does affect the timing of milestones. American children don't learn to hold up their head as young as they used to, and it's because American children don't have to. Your book also suggests that there's some sort of ethnic variation in SIDS, with African American and Eskimo infants being much more likely as other children to die of SIDS. You know what? Melanie says she had her daughter sleep on her side. Melanie, did you use those chalk block looking things, those two triangles that they gave you? Yep. Okay. Yep. She used a special formula. We had the little pillow too that kind of propped my kid up on its side, but it just seemed like an uncomfortable way to sleep, Melanie. So I don't know. I've never slept on my side. I don't know if any of you slide sleepers. So who knows? Your book is then going to talk about infant nutrition. And it turns out my 2 slides are backwards. She had a part for under the neck. Oh, okay. I have my slides are out of order, so I'm going to have to backtrack one. All right, so infant nutrition. Another important factor in raising healthy children is what you feed them in infancy. You know what? Again, I hate to go back to when I was born, class of 1969, back in the Stone Age, but I don't think they had really invented, or the use of formula wasn't widespread at that point. So my mom told me that for me and my cousins, you know what they used to feed us? They would actually take cow's milk, warm it up, and stir in a little bit of sugar. So sugar and milk was what some country families used for formula back in the day. Can you imagine feeding your infant cow's milk with sugar in it? But that's what they used to do. Now we have these very fancy formulas that we use that are perfectly designed with all the nutrients that an infant should use. And so you'll see right underneath me is a bottle of Similac, which is the infant formula you get if you choose not to breastfeed your baby. There are lots of different kinds. Similac is just one brand. It's extremely expensive. In fact, it's so expensive most of the stores put it behind the counters because they don't want people stealing it. But that little jar right below me is probably a $25 or $30 bottle jar of formula for your baby. Okay, so nutritional needs. They say that infants should consume approximately 50 calories per day for each pound they weigh. That is actually double the normal calories that you and I would be, at least double the normal calories that you and I would eat as part of our normal diet. But of course, infants are going to, triple in weight and increase their height by 50% in the first year. So they need to consume a lot of calories. Now, not underneath me is the formula that you give your infants when all they can do is suck. Okay, but as their motor skills improve and their eating changes from using suck and swallow to they can then use, and I'm pointing down here, if you see all the way on the other screen, the old beech nut naturals right there. That's a pineapple and pear. That's the first solid food you're going to give your kid, along with maybe some rice cereal or the classic green beans or peas, jar of peas. Those are the first solid foods you're going to give their kid, usually around 6 months. And this is going to occur when they develop the motor control that allow them to engage in the chewing and swallowing activities. And if you've ever tried to feed a 5 or 6 month old for the first time, it's actually kind of funny and frustrating at the same time, because you'll stick the food in their mouth and their tongue will spit it right out because they haven't learned how to swallow yet. Bizarrely enough, you have to learn how to eat. We are not given to that behavior. We have the sucking reflex, but just like every other behavior, we have to learn how to eat. And that's usually around 5 to 6 months. Now, D. Oxendine is mentioning something, and I'm not sure if he's talking about what I'm talking about, but usually when you put your kid onto solid meals with the formula and with the breast milk, your children digest it so easily that it goes through their system and they wake up hungry a lot quicker. And so one of the strategies that Southern country mothers use, and I'm not sure if this is good, but they start putting their kid on this stuff called rice milk. And it's just kind of this milky goop. It looks sort of like cereal or oatmeal. And you mix it up, and it's a little more solid than the Similac. And when you put it on your kid's belly, it makes them sleep through the night And I think that's what he's talking about with the natural sleeping formula. It's cheating and you're not supposed to do it. And, my wife didn't want to do it. My mom was saying, hey, your baby will sleep through the night at 3 months if you put that kid on some rice cereal. And my wife just wouldn't do it because it was against the rules. But if you want to cheat a little bit, when you move your kid to solid food, that is definitely a full belly makes you sleep all night long. It's funny, you should know that, Dee. How do you, a young college guy of all people, know that old mom's trick? That's kind of interesting. Oh, I think all moms do it. Okay, I just thought it was part of my poor Southern upbringing, Mel G. Okay, now your book talks about infant nutrition. And what they say is that it is important to introduce your kids to fruit and vegetables early. They talk about 4 months. So I guess you start putting those little beech nut green peas and vegetables and the apricots in your kid's mouth around 4 months if you can. Your book actually suggests that kids are less likely to be vegetable picky eaters if you introduce vegetables at them at 4 months as opposed to 6 months. Now, the book talks just about American diets, and they suggest that Americans are absolutely horrible about what they feed their babies. And they suggest that 2/3 of all parents don't feed their kids vegetables during infancy. Instead, they fed 2/3, the most common vegetable fed to 15 months old, are actually French fries. Can you imagine that? Grandma talking to you. Okay, Dee, I get it. So they talked about the fact that this is a horrible way to raise your children. And where is that? It's in the book here somewhere. I don't remember all the exact details, but I did want to mention it to you. And I thought it was absolutely shocking what they said. Here, where is it in the book? Where is it? Intermodal, Chapter 4, Physical Development, Infancy. Where is that food? Credola. Outcomes. There we go. Let's see. Of 3,000 randomly selected 4 to 24-month-olds documented that many U.S. parents are feeding their babies too much junk food and not giving them enough fruits and vegetables. Up to 1/3 of babies ate no vegetables and fruit, but ate French fries, and almost half to all 7 to 8-month-old babies were fed desserts or sweetened drinks. And by 15 months, French fries is the most popular vegetable given to kids, which is absolutely awful. I know that my brother-in-law and his wife, man, all they give their kid is sweet stuff. That's all the kid will eat. You know, pancakes and cereal, chocolate milk, sweetened cereal. The kid never eat honey buns for breakfast, and they give the kid vegetables, and he says, no, I don't want a vegetable, I want a powdered donut. And because he won't eat the vegetables, they don't want him to go hungry, so they give him the powdered donuts. So my young nephew has sort of blackmailed his parents into feeding him nothing but sugar, and that's all he eats day in, day out. An absolutely horrible thing to do for your kids' physical and intellectual development. So, your book talks about breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. Some moms choose to breastfeed. Your book suggests that these days 80% of mothers in the U.S. breastfeed their baby in the hospital, but that drops down to about 50% of mothers once they leave the hospital. Your book actually suggests in a lot of international communities, in developing nations, only 25% of mothers breastfeed their babies. Now, of course, you folks have all heard this. There are advantages to breastfeeding your baby. Turns out these tend to be nutritional only. They don't necessarily tend to be related to cognitive development. They don't necessarily promote the equality attachment between the mother. The research doesn't say that breastfeeding helps the attachment between the infant and the mother, and it doesn't necessarily help this kid's school behavior, but it does help with regard to physical health. They have fewer gastrointestinal infections. Infants who are breastfeed are less likely to develop respiratory tract infections. It protects against wheezing in babies. They're not sure if it's linked to the development in asthma. The research doesn't support that link as much, but they are less likely to wheeze in infancy. They're going to have less infections in the ear, throat, and sinus infections. They're less likely to experience hospitalizations for various infections. And they're less likely to become overweight or obese in adulthood. Less likely to suffer from type 1 diabetes, and less likely to suffer from SIDS as well. Now, your book, I didn't have it down here. Oh, actually, I do have it here. The maternal benefits. It turns out that it's not only better for babies too, but apparently it appears to lower the incidence of breast and ovarian cancer for females, for moms who breastfeed, and also there's a reduced rate of type 2 diabetes. But the book suggests that it's not necessarily linked to the reduced risk of developing allergies. How many of you moms out there breastfed? My wife did not choose to breastfeed, and I gave her a hard time because I was a butthead husband who didn't understand. But there were many reasons she didn't want to breastfeed, and she told me some of them she was comfortable, but she just didn't want to do it. And so I don't know if any of you felt the pressure, but there is a huge pressure to breastfeed. If you go to your birthing classes, I guarantee you your birth instructor is going to tell you not only do they want you to engage in natural childbirth, but they're really going to push you to breastfeed. Oh, wow, Fatima breastfed her children for a year. Wow, that's cool. I don't know why they're holding your comment. There you go. For some reason, I had to click on OK for us to see your comment. Maybe it's because you said breast. Oh my God. Right, you tried it. It wasn't for you. And that's no big deal. I mean, that's what they make formula for. Now it turns, and in fact, another mom cheat. It turns out that babies digest, that formula is not digested quite as well as breastfeed. So your kid's going to have maybe a few more burps and whatnots. But it turns out that babies sleep better through the night if you give them formula, because they have to wake up and be fed. They're digesting the breast milk so easily that they wake up and want food more often during the night. I'm not sure if there's scientific research for that, but that's what we used to talk about, the fact that breastfed babies, they digest the food so quickly that they're up in the middle of the night wanting more food. So again, a mom hack, feed them the formula and they'll sleep a little bit better at night. See, and so Fatima has a reason why she wanted to breastfeed. Melanie had reasons why she didn't want to. But like I said, if you go to your birth instructor, boy, they're going to push you to do it. Now, it turns out that moms who have infectious diseases or taking drugs or has tuberculosis, they may have to be careful breastfeeding. I had a friend of mine who, during breastfeeding, was not able to take some of her depression and anxiety medications because it was thought that these might negatively impact the baby. So moms have to be careful with that. Breastfeeding can be physically difficult or painful. My wife didn't dig it, and there are some downsides. It's not as warm and awesome as it looks for all women. The weird thing is, a lot of these advantages that I've told you about, we don't know if they're experimentally, these are not conducted experimentally rigorous studies to demonstrate this. You might be looking at correlational effects. Maybe other behaviors that the mom does aside from breastfeeding contribute to these health differences. And as I said in the bottom, we're not sure that these health effects extend beyond anything other than physical health. It gives them plenty of gas, so moms have to sleep the child's on its stomach to prevent the pain. Yes, and you also have to learn the fine art of burping that baby. It's harder than you think. You got to learn how to become a master burper. You got to do a little rub, then a little tap, then a little rub, then a little tap, then maybe if the wife's not looking, a little tug there to kind of push that gas right out. And so, there's definitely some gas that is created by the bottle feeding, or actually feeding in general, because the kid sucks in air while they're sucking on the nipple or the breast. Let me go back to this slide again. Your book talks a little bit about international studies on children's hunger and the problems in infancy. And infants' chronic malnutrition and protein deficiency is a worldwide problem. I think here in America we don't understand how easy we have it and how accessible food, and more importantly, protein, the building blocks of our body, how difficult it is for some people around the world to obtain enough food for their children. This chronic malnutrition seems to be very problematic in developing countries that lack clean water and milk. It turns out that there are increasing numbers of HIV positive moms who may not understand the danger of breastfeeding when you have this virus. What we find is that that children who do not get enough food are going to have impaired physical, cognitive, and social development. So there are real important implications for children not getting enough protein in their diets. And what you're going to see, that not only do we have physical problems, but we have cognitive. Not only does it affect the physical well-being of the child, but it also affects their intellectual development, and that these can last throughout a lifetime unless there are interventions that help them. Any questions so far? I'm 30 minutes into this. I hope I'm not spending too much time. Okay, so I sent the video around the baby human to walk, and we were talking a little bit about research into infant motor behavior and infant sensory perception. And what we talked about in class yesterday was that sensory motor connection that we make. And we have to learn how to move our body in the world and respond to sensory experiences to know where we are in space so that we can engage in behaviors. So in order to walk, you have to be able to have a sense of balance. That's to perceive the world. We talked about children learning depth perception when they're crawling. And when a child finally starts to move, they use their peripheral vision and then begin to sense the world and understand things like depth perception. So sensory and motor experience kind of go together. And so psychologists are very interested in how our senses develop during the first couple of years of life. Now, it's difficult to study sensory perception in infants since they can't move and talk and interact in complex ways. It's sort of difficult to figure out what they know. And so over the last, I would say, 60 years, when what we call Neo-Piagetian period developed and people began doing really rigorous experiments with infants, we've developed some different ways of studying children and learning what it is they know and don't know. And your book on page, goodness me, it's towards the back of your chapter. Yeah, page 1, 127 and 128 is going to talk about research methods for studying infant perception studying infant perception. And so your book talks about 6 different ways. Frankly, to me, it looks sort of like 4 different ways, really. And so I'd like for you to be familiar with these different ways. The early research showing that humans had a preference for faces within the first days of life was done by a fellow named Roger Fantz, who used the visual preference method. He would show babies pictures of different things, and then he would watch where their eyes would go, and he found that babies would spend more time looking at face pictures than non-face pictures. So one way we can sort of judge what babies like is by looking at measuring how long they look at different things. This research method is called the visual preference method. All right, what do they look at? Now, your book also talks about what we would call habituation and dishabituation studies. I think they're sort of 2 sides of the same coin. It turns out that people, when they get used to something, they get bored with it. And we call that habituation. If you've ever been into a smelly room, you ever notice how when you walk into getting your brother's smelly car, you smell the stink for about 5 minutes and then you get used to it and you don't smell it anymore. If you're in a noisy room, the noise may bother you at first, but you get used to it and quit paying attention to it. In both of these cases, you have habituated to the sensory experience. Human beings habituate to things and then they quit finding them interesting. And so what you'll find is that we can tell when children are surprised is we can show them a picture of something for a long time until they get bored with it. And then we can switch that picture out and we can switch it with another picture which is similar except for one small change. And if the child starts looking at this at the stimulus again, we can assume that the child is surprised. The child noticed the difference. I don't know if you know this. I've got a video that I want you to watch. It's called The Baby Human to Talk. But what they've discovered is that before the age of 9 months, we can all hear the sounds in any language. But at about 9 months of age, you become deaf to the changes in sound that are not used in your language. So each and every one of you that comes from a different country and speaks a different language, when you were growing up as a baby, you learned all the sounds in your language. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, just laugh at an Anglo when they try to trill their R, kind of like a Hispanic student does. When I say Rio Grande, all of you Hispanic students are probably going, oh my God, that's the worst thing I ever heard. I remember I had an Arabic student one time that tried to teach me how to say the Arabic alphabet, and I had real difficulty saying the letter Dod. If we have any Hispanics, any Arabic students and speaking students, you're probably laughing at my poor pronouncement of that particular sound. And it turns out that there are some sounds in languages that are not in other languages. And the crazy thing is, we become deaf to them at about 10 months of age, 9 months of age. We go from being universal linguists to specialized linguists. And so what they'll do is they'll do habituation study where they'll show a kid a particular sound, and then they'll change that sound like it does in a specific language. And it turns out that at 7 months, the kid habituates to the old sound, can hear the new sound, and looks and perks up when they hear the dishabituating sound, right? Take that same kid 3 months later, and they won't be surprised by the change in sound. Okay, yeah, so Fatima, I don't know if you heard me mispronouncing it. Was I saying Dod right? I'd be curious to hear your opinion. I had a student laugh at me because she said I couldn't say it right. Maybe you can't tell on the internet. So habituation studies, we can show a kid something till they get bored with it. We can change the scene, and if they don't look back and they're still bored, we can tell they didn't notice the change in their environment. See, Dodd. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I can't hear that sound. And my friend would say the difference, and I could never tell what sound he was trying to make because I was deaf to it. Now, you can do the same thing with what they call a high amplitude sucking. It turns out that when a kid sees something interesting, a little infant sees something interesting, they'll start sucking a nipple, a pacifier, faster. And so what you do is you measure the kid's level of baseline sucking, and then you show them something, and if they start sucking faster, you can tell that they were surprised, that they noticed the change. So what we do is we change kids' environment, and we see if they're surprised by things in the environment. And if you're surprised, it means you knew something was supposed to occur, and you were surprised by it. Okay? Now, to use the visual preference method, they also use eye tracking headgear to see what your kid looks at. I remember taking my oldest son to a math study when he was 10 months old at Duke University. It turns out that children have a basic sense of math at about the age of 6 months of age. They can tell more than or less than. And what they would do is they put my kid in this headset, and this headset tracked where he looked on a screen. And you can see that children can look at groups of dots, and they can tell when there are more dots in one side than in another group of dots. And so they use that for math studies, and they also use that for visual preference. It turns out that little infants spend most of they learn to look at the eyes and the mouth when trying to discriminate between faces. Infants look at the whole face. They look at the edges, so they may look at the outside part of the face. But research shows that over several months, they quit looking at the outside part of the face, and they start looking at eyes and nose and mouth, because those are important parts of the face. And we've learned this from from using eye tracking headgear to watch where exactly children look on a screen. I did good, actually. Sweet. I'm heading to Lebanon next week, man. I'm just kidding. Thank you, though, Fatima. You're probably lying to me, but I'll take it. Probably just trying to make me feel good, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the sensory experiences that have. Oh, and by the way, if you folks were in class last night, you'll notice that we have the visual cliff right here. And this is one of the classic experimental methods by Gibson and Walk. Eleanor Gibson and her colleague, I forget Walk's first name. But what they did was, you see there's a little drop off right here. So the kid's sort of like on a shelf. But what they do is they put plexiglass over that shelf. So it still looks like a drop-off, but the kid won't get hurt if they crawl out onto the plexiglass. And what they find is that kids that just start crawling are willing to crawl across the plexiglass because they're not afraid, they don't have depth perception. But the video last night suggested that after 2 or 3 weeks of moving around, your child develops the ability to understand depth perception, and they then become afraid to crawl out across the plexiglass because they see the steep drop off. And this was the way that they demonstrated how children learn depth perception. In the video last night, we found that it's the moving around and the development of peripheral vision that creates a sense of depth perception in children. Okay? Now, what other kinds of things? Newborn's vision is estimated to be 20 to 2240 on the Snellen chart. I'm pretty stinking blind. I'm about 2240 without my glasses. So when I look out without my glasses, I can see children. They can see the big structures, but they can't see details. That's actually going to go from fuzzy to pretty much adult clarity about 1 year of age. Turns out that children within hours of birth will prefer looking at a face to other faces. If you look at the picture I have here, it goes from 220, 24 to 2020. Going from left to right. And so you'll see how the infant's visual acuity clarifies during the first year. And as I said, they prefer looking at faces within hours of birth. If you folks took my introductory sight class, I told you there's actually an area in your temporal lobe called the fusiform gyrus, which is where it's a part of your brain that specifically loves to see faces, Okay, now color vision begins to develop after a couple of weeks, and by the 4 to 8 weeks, the child has a basic sense of red, yellow, and green, but color vision doesn't really mature until about 4 months. That's when they get all the colors of the rainbow like you and I have. All right. Now, the weird thing is your book talks about occlusion. So if you're looking at me and I move over here, I am wait, let me see. How do I do this? You'll notice I am partially occluded. Do you see that? You can see part of me, but you can't see all of me. I am partially occluded. Now, what you folks would do, let's say I was moving this way. You know that if I'm moving this way, you should be able to see part of me for a while. What if I automatically went from here to here, right? And just disappear, and you didn't even see the partial occlusion. It turns out that at the age of 2 months, kids don't understand that something's supposed to be partially occluded as it goes behind an object. They don't understand that. And so, but after about 2 months, they begin to be surprised when objects just disappear. And so if you'll look at the little picture I have right underneath me, you'll see the ball is going behind the green screen. And you'll notice that the ball, as it rolls behind the green screen, it should become partially occluded as it disappears. That's the normal state of events. But they set it up where the kid sees the ball and the ball's completely unoccluded, and then all of a sudden it just disappears, and then it automatically pops out the other side, and no partial occlusion occurs. What they find is that less than 2 months of age, the kid isn't surprised by that event. But after two months, the kid actually becomes shocked by that because they understand that visual objects in their environment can be partially covered up. You actually have to learn that fact as you see the world. I hope that makes sense, right? And so, exactly, the peekaboo. So, and kids love the little peekaboo because they're so surprised by this occluding act as it occurs. Now, next week, we're going to watch a video called The Baby Human to Think. I've actually got both videos in your weekly discussion collaboration folder for next week. The Baby Human to Talk and The Baby Human to Think. And both of those are 45-minute documentaries that cover the experiments that show how we've learned how babies learn to talk and learn to think in the first couple of years of life. And we're going to talk about those videos. And what I want you to see in that video, they'll show you how children deal with these occlusion problems, and the ability to understand that objects can be obscured by other objects is something that we have to learn over the first couple months of our life. Okay? Changes in hearing. Okay, your book's going to talk a little bit about hearing, and it turns out, so the fetus can recognize the mother's voice in utero, and so talking to your baby is a good thing because your kids do hear the voice. And the weird thing is, we know that they can hear the sounds and the cadence of these words. So if you read your kid a book in utero and then read that kid the book after they're born, you're going to notice that the kid will remember what they heard because they actually heard and processed that sound. Now, it turns out children don't have, their hearing isn't born completely adult-like. They don't hear soft sounds at birth as well as an adult does. So you can whisper at about 4 or 5 feet and an adult can hear you. If you whisper at 4 or 5 feet, a young baby, a newborn baby, will not hear you. Kids are also less sensitive to the pitch of sounds at adulthood. So pitch is caused by the frequency of waveforms that goes in your ear. It turns out that you have in your inner ear, you have this semicircular canal with hairs in it. And depending upon where the hairs bend, you hear high-pitched sounds or low-pitched sounds. Well, it turns out that this sort of inner ear area has to mature, and children don't hear high and low pitches. Infants don't hear high and low pitches as well as adults do at birth. Children, however, do have a general sense of sound localization. And by that, I mean they kind of know where sounds are coming from, okay? But they get better at it at 6 months of age, and that's because they can start moving their head around. And as their motor behavior, as I told you last night, as their motor behaviors get better, their sensory abilities improve. Now, we talked about intermodal perception, which is being able to see the different, being able to tie your senses together. So not only can I see my phone, but I can use my sight to help me pick that phone up. That is actually controlled by this part on your brainstem I have visualized here called the superior colliculus, which is 2 little lumps on the backside of your thalamus. Okay, I am sorry I ran over today. I did not mean to go 49 minutes. I do apologize. Thank you for the 8 out of 9 of you managed to hang the whole time, and I really do appreciate that. Do you have any questions for me so far? Now, next week, I'm going to ask you to watch the baby human to think or to talk. Which one of those videos do you think would be more interesting for you to watch? Would you rather spend 45 minutes watching how researchers study about babies thinking, or would you be more interested in studying, watching a video about how researchers study the development of language in infancy? Which one do you think would be more interested? Thinking. I hear you, Araya. I would like that as well. But the talking one is pretty cool too. I just feel like you all will kill me if I tell you to watch 2 45-minute videos. But if you are interested, please watch them both because they're incredibly interesting. Okay, I've got 2 votes for thinking. The people who are focused are going to be the ones who carry the day. All right, so it looks like next week we'll be talking about the video, The Baby Human to Think. Does anybody have any questions for me before I let you go? Deox, thank you, sir. Any questions, any questions, any questions? You folks are a great student. Thank you for your focus, coming to class, coming to the webinars. I really appreciate your level of responsibility. This is a tough time, everybody having to switch to online education. I know it's not an optimal experience, but you folks are optimal students and you have done a great job and make me so proud. Okay, I'm going to stay here after I close out this broadcast. I'm going to stay in the chat bar for a few minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be more than happy to handle them off camera. But otherwise, I'm going to say goodbye until next week. Until then, take care.